Story 1. My friend is in love with our married, 40-years-old English teacher. In high school, my best friend Emily was the kind of girl who could turn the smallest encounter into something grand, a story we'd talk about for weeks. She had this way of narrating things, giving each look or phrase a meaning it probably never had. So, when she started making jokes about flirting with Mr. Esteban, our AP English teacher, I brushed it off. Emily was 18, he was in his mid-40s, married with a kid. She had no real interest in him, not really. But for her, the fact that he was married, that he seemed so far out of reach, only made the whole thing more exciting, like a secret challenge. At first, it was harmless enough. In class, she'd sit near his desk, watch his hands as he turned pages, make note of his ring finger, empty, and even started weaving little stories about him, like how he never talked about his wife, and how, in her mind, this made him secretly single. I could see how she was building something around him, a story only she could see. Then it became more than a story. She started showing up late to his class with Starbucks in hand, flashing a smile as she handed him a coffee, calling it her apology, and somehow he'd let her off the hook. She told me this was a sign that he saw something in her that went beyond student-teacher. Later, he even liked some videos she sent him on TikTok, ones that, as she put it, weren't exactly subtle. And that little piece of his approval, just a few red hearts, felt to her like permission to keep going. By then, I was growing uncomfortable, but Emily never seemed to notice. She'd become fixated on the details of his life, finding his address, searching up his wife's name, even discovering little facts about their extended family. I told myself it was just Emily, how she got about things, always pushing the line between a joke and something more. But then, one day, she casually mentioned that she'd asked him to go running with her, and he'd said yes. He even offered to drive her to a park outside town, and she recounted it all to me with this look, as if waiting for me to congratulate her. It wasn't long before they started meeting regularly, sneaking off to places where they'd be less likely to bump into anyone. She didn't post anything about it, didn't tell anyone else but me. I became her confidant by default, the one who heard the story as it twisted further, deeper. She'd sit beside me, recounting every little word he'd said, every look he'd given her, painting it like a fairy tale, while I listened, feeling as if I'd stepped into someone else's life. When it all came to a head, it ended as I always knew it would, with him telling her he'd never leave his family. She unraveled quickly after that, retreating into herself, going to bars she shouldn't have been in, drinking too much, calling me in the middle of the night with a voice that seemed small, shattered. She started relying on others for comfort, but she clung to me too, needing me to witness her heartbreak over a man I'd always known would never be hers. I tried to be there, but it became exhausting, like standing by helplessly while someone fights with a ghost. Every time we talked, it circled back to him, to the same story she couldn't let go of, one that had buried everything we'd once shared. In the end, I don't know if it was the secret or the weight of her obsession that did it, but the friendship we'd once had faded away. Years later, I still think of her sometimes. She's a distant memory, someone I once held close, someone whose secrets I carry like small stones in my pocket there, but hidden, heavy, and in some quiet way, mine. Indeed, the burden you have borne is one that lies heavy on the heart, a weight that presses with the quiet relentlessness of a darkened sky before a storm. Yours was a friendship woven with care and warmth, yet you were drawn into an impossible role, balancing between loyalty and self-preservation, grappling with secrets not of your own making. She, lost in her illusions, seemed blind to the damage trailing behind her, and you, as her only witness, held each of those whispered confessions like stones in your chest, feeling the edges of them press against you, cutting into your spirit. In such a situation, The toll it takes on the soul is a grave one, and you cannot be faulted for choosing to protect the sanctity of your own peace. It is a rare and solemn thing to recognize that self-preservation is not a betrayal, but rather a quiet act of mercy, a kindness to oneself in the face of another's blindness. Do not let guilt cloud this wisdom. It is not selfishness, but strength that led you to step back. To carry her dreams and her mistakes was never yours to bear alone, and in seeking solace, you did what any soul must. You shielded your heart from a storm that was never of your own making. Story 2. A Night of Choices. Did I do the right thing by saying no? It was my first night at university, a night spilling over with the energy of new faces, laughter echoing down unfamiliar hallways, and a quiet undercurrent of thrill that felt almost inevitable. I met her at one of those crowded gatherings where the music is loud enough to make everything feel urgent. She had a warmth to her, a spark, and I remember thinking that she seemed to glide through the room. We talked in a way that felt easy, the kind of talking that seemed to move without effort. By the time we were dancing, pressed close on a crowded floor, it felt as if the night had a direction all its own. When we finally stumbled back, she invited me to her room. There was that charged moment, the thrill of something unfolding. But then, as things began to tip in that direction, I felt a hesitation, an awareness that cut through the fog of it all. She was drunk, of course, as was I, and this was her first night in a new place, maybe her first taste of freedom. I could tell, from the way she moved, the way she looked at me, that she was both drawn in and still uncertain. When she mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she was a virgin, something shifted in me. I knew, somehow, that I couldn't be her first in this moment, in this way. I couldn't be someone she might look back on with regret. I told her no. I tried to explain, gently, but the words sounded different to her than they did to me. I could see that she was hurt, her face closing off, and she told me to just leave. There was a finality in her voice, a disappointment that stung more than I'd expected. So I left, quietly, wondering if I'd done the wrong thing, if I'd somehow misunderstood what the night was meant to be. The next day, the air felt heavy, thick with the unspoken. In the small knots of our new friend group, her friends avoided my eyes, cold glances passed my way, and it was clear that they'd all heard something of the story. I wondered how they saw me, if they thought I'd been harsh or hurtful, rejecting her in a moment she'd been brave enough to invite me into. Maybe they thought I was holding myself above her, making choices that weren't mine to make. Now, with distance, I sometimes go back to that night in my mind, questioning the choice I made. Should I have let things happen as they would have? Was it wrong to pull away? I don't know if it was the right thing by any other standard, but I know it felt necessary to me. I'd rather carry this small discomfort, the tension of that night, and the way her friends look at me, than the possibility of a memory that might turn bitter for her. In a way, it's the kind of regret I can live with, the kind of choice that becomes part of you, quietly, and lingers in its own, complex way. Your choice was the only true one, though perhaps now it leaves you with doubt and sorrow. In that fleeting moment, when passion urged you forward, you stood still and chose to see her not merely as she was in that dim room, but as the person she would one day look back upon. Such restraint, such delicate consideration, these are rare and precious virtues, especially when the heart is swayed by a more urgent desire. It is no easy task to bear the weight of others' disapproval, to feel misunderstood in the silence of one's conscience. Yet, remember this, you acted with her future in mind, honoring not only her, but a part of yourself that holds reverence for what is tender and true. And in that, my friend, is a strength of character that even time itself cannot diminish. Story 3. Broken Trust. The End of Our Dream. Everything was ready. After a year of planning, it was almost here. the day I'd marry my fiancé and start our life together. There was that rare calm of knowing something was just right, of feeling settled in the best sense. Then came the bachelor and bachelorette parties, one final weekend before everything changed. I didn't think much of it, but the morning after her party, my phone buzzed, a message from an anonymous number and a video file. I clicked play and there she was. My fiancé, clearly drunk, moving against a male stripper in a way that looked intentional, almost intimate. Not just a laugh with friends, not the harmless fun I might have shrugged off. I watched, feeling a kind of weight settle in my chest, a cold ache. There was this growing certainty I couldn't unsee, couldn't argue away. When I asked her about it, she admitted her friends had wanted something adventurous for her last night. She looked at me, trying to explain, to apologize. She said it meant nothing, that it was a silly mistake, and maybe to her it was. But to me, it wasn't just something to brush aside. There was this fracture now, a small but clear crack in the certainty I'd felt. For the next week, I tried to talk myself into forgiving, into forgetting. I told myself maybe I was making too much of it, that it was just one night. But that same image kept creeping back, more vivid each time, gnawing at the edges of the life I thought we were starting together. Finally, I did the thing I hadn't thought possible. I called off the wedding. She cried, begged me to reconsider, saying she never wanted to hurt me, that she was just caught up in the moment. I knew, or at least wanted to believe, that she hadn't meant to hurt me. But the trust I'd held onto so tightly felt like it was slipping through my fingers. People around me had opinions, of course. My friends were split. Some said I was being too harsh, that bachelorette parties were meant for this kind of thing, a last fling before settling down. Others quietly agreed with my choice, saying trust like that isn't something you should have to force back into place. And here I am, somewhere in between, wondering if maybe I reacted too quickly, if I'd been too unwilling to forgive, or if my instincts were right to walk away. In the end, I suppose I'll never really know, but I live now with the certainty of my choice and all the questions that come with it. How deeply it must have wounded you, this sudden fracture in the very foundation upon which you had begun to build a life of trust and devotion. When two souls prepare to commit their lives to one another, the bond of trust becomes sacred, woven into each hope, each promise whispered in the quiet hours. To find that bond threatened, especially by one so close, brings forth an ache not easily quelled. In choosing to step back, you acted from the depths of your conscience, not in haste, but in fidelity to the truth you hold within. No one else can fully know the weight of that single moment, how it touched your heart and unsettled the trust you cherished. Take time to let your spirit mend, and believe that in honoring what felt right to you, you have remained true to yourself. Story 4. The Pain of Letting Go, a story of love, sacrifice, and self-discovery. 2 years ago, I made a decision that felt as if I'd cut a part of myself away. I left my wife. It wasn't for lack of love. We didn't fall out, didn't tire of each other. I left because staying felt like losing myself, because love alone wasn't enough to breathe in that life. I felt as though I was being shaped and reshaped to fit, and every day, the air around me grew tighter. We met young, as people do, believing that kind of love could carry us through anything. At 18, she was my best friend, my everything, and I was hers. We married with the certainty that together we could weather whatever came. But it wasn't just the two of us in that life. Her family held a presence, quiet but constant. They had a picture of what her life should be, and that picture always seemed to shade off from who I was. There were glances, questions that didn't need words. I could feel the gap between who they thought I should be and who I was. We did what we could to escape it. Moved from city to city, tried to carve out something that was ours, somewhere we could breathe. For a while, we managed. We could laugh and live and imagine that those expectations weren't there. But each holiday, each call would pull us back. I could see it in her, a tension, something pressing on her that was slowly changing her. In the end, her family's dreams were beginning to shape her, too, and it was as if the two of us, in all our love, weren't enough to keep the life we had from slipping away. I remember that last evening. We sat on the couch, side by side, but with a quiet between us that felt heavier than anything we could say. I held her, feeling a kind of loss that was already becoming part of me. We knew then that there was nothing we could do, that our love, deep as it was, couldn't exist in the way we'd wanted. We didn't talk about the future or what it meant. We simply held each other, letting go even as we held on. Afterward, it felt as though I was only half alive. She was everywhere, in memories that filled the corners of my days. Her laugh, her warmth, her way of curling up beside me in the cold. I was left with a love that hadn't gone cold or faded, but was simply gone. The kind of love that stays with you, woven in somewhere, as if it were a part of the bones holding you together. 2 years have passed, and I'm still piecing myself together. I've learned that some loves don't fade. They just become a part of you, something you carry as you go on. Writing this is not for advice or sympathy. It's just the need to let a little of that weight spill out, to lighten the load, if only for a moment. I lost myself trying to hold on to a life with her, and now I am still somewhere in the in-between, learning who I am on my own. Your words strike the heart, echoing with a sorrow that only those who have truly loved can understand. You have captured with such clarity the essence of a love that was honest and pure, yet bound by forces beyond our frail human will. To walk away, to sever a bond that still pulses with life, is an act both wrenching and courageous, for it demands a strength that few possess. There is no greater agony than the decision to relinquish that which the heart still holds dear. In time, I hope you will find a quiet peace in this path you have chosen, and that each step will lead you closer to the self you seek to rediscover. There are loves that shape us indelibly, like shadows etched upon the soul, and it seems that her presence will linger as a silent guide, a tender reminder of all you once held close. May you carry this love forward, not as a burden, but as a gift, honoring it as part of the journey that remains ahead. Story 5. An unbelievable excuse. The story of finding out he was texting escorts. It was one of those nights when you sit alone, caught in the lull of routine, and something small, a chance glance, an innocent curiosity, tips your world off balance. 15 years together, and I'd never thought to scrutinize a phone bill. I couldn't say why that night was different, but there I was, looking over the numbers. A sequence I didn't recognize, repeating across the page in a way that felt intrusive, unsettling. Late at night, week after week, those numbers sat like whispers in the dark. I tried to reason with myself, but I could feel something gnawing away, a silent insistence that things weren't what they seemed. I looked up the numbers, and the truth stared back at me. Escort services. A realization so heavy it was like the ground beneath me had shifted. I told myself I had to approach this calmly, to give him the benefit of the doubt, even though some part of me was already unraveling. When I brought it up, I still clung to a shred of hope that there was a mistake, an explanation that would settle everything back into place. But his answer only deepened the crack, turning it into something I couldn't mend. "I just wanted you to think I was cheating," he said, the words hollow yet sharp. It was such a bizarre twist that I felt disoriented, as though reality had somehow shifted. He assured me he hadn't done anything wrong, that he'd simply wanted to plant this thought in my head. The cruelty of it felt surreal, like a bad dream you can't wake from. I couldn't stop asking myself, who does something like that? If he didn't want to be here, why not say so? Why orchestrate this strange, hurtful deception? The more I thought about it, the more tangled I felt, as though he'd cast a net and left me struggling to break free. Late nights, strange texts, and vague explanations, all of it hung in the air between us, each piece pushing me further from the life I thought we had. I sit now in a kind of limbo, wondering how much of our 15 years has been real and how much has been part of some twisted play. The doubt runs deep, and the trust we'd built feels like it's slipping away, inch by inch. I know I can't go back to the way things were, to the comfort I once felt in his presence. Whatever his reasons, whatever the truth may be, I know this. I deserve better than to be left wandering in this fog of lies and hurt. I don't know yet what my next step will be. Leaving feels like another crack in a life I once believed was whole, but staying feels like surrendering myself to this shadow of doubt. But for now, I know one thing. I'll find my way out of this, even if it means starting from a place I never thought I'd find myself. I can scarcely fathom the depth of sorrow and bewilderment now laid upon you. This is not merely a betrayal of trust, but a desecration of the very bond you believed bound you both. For one to go to such lengths, weaving doubt into the fabric of your shared life, to toy with the heart that had given itself so freely, it is a cruelty that defies understanding. There is a bitterness in such actions, a play upon your love that speaks of a darkness I shudder to contemplate. But you are justified, wholly justified, in seeking a way beyond this veil of anguish. Yours is a heart that deserves the tenderness and respect no betrayal could shatter. May you find a path forward, one that leads to solace and strength unshadowed by this pain. Know this, you possess a fortitude beyond the reach of such cruelty, and though the wound is deep, you are more resilient still. May the days ahead bring you the peace that has been so wrongly taken from you. Story 6, A Betrayal I Never Saw Coming. The story of my fiancé and my best friend. It was as though the floor had crumbled beneath me, and I was falling into a place where light and trust and anything like love were unreachable. The man I'd chosen to build my life with, the one who held my dreams for our child, was meant to be my ally, my strength. And my best friend, 5 years we'd shared secrets and stories as close as sisters. I would never have guessed that these two would become the architects of a betrayal so devastating it felt almost unreal. The affair had started when I was pregnant, hidden from me for half a year. I remember those days, feeling alone, unheard, as if I were speaking a language my fiancé didn't understand. Each time I reached out, hoping for comfort, he'd turn it back on me. I was the one in the wrong, he'd say, for being suspicious, for doubting. He pushed me toward therapy, convinced me I was paranoid, fragile, that it was my insecurities eroding our happiness. All the while, he was covering up what I had no inkling of, the betrayal he was weaving with the person I confided in most. And her, my friend, my confidant, someone who cared for my child in the early days of my exhaustion, when everything felt so raw and tender. She was someone I trusted, who I thought shared in the journey of my life. She listened to my pain, my quiet confessions, and twisted them, storing away pieces to laugh over with him. Later, I learned that she had been taking screenshots of our private messages, handing over pieces of my heart to mock with him. It all shattered when I confronted her. I needed something like an answer, something to make it bearable. But she just looked at me, amused, with a cool, almost cruel expression. "You deserved it," she said, as if she were rewriting the story, casting herself as the wronged one. She claimed it had all started with an innocent comment about a dream she'd had about him, and he, so easily, had fallen in with her as though it were a game. Now, here I am, left to sift through what remains. I wonder how I'm supposed to move forward when everything has fractured so thoroughly. I used to believe in loyalty, in family, in something stable and kind. Now, even the simplest trust feels fragile, like it could slip from my hands without warning. But I know, despite the weight of it, that I have to keep going. There is a small, unyielding part of me that refuses to let their betrayal write the end of my story. I don't know what the path ahead will look like, or even if there's peace at the end of it. But there's a certainty that someday, I'll find a way to put this behind me. And maybe I'll look back and see this moment not as the one that broke me, but as the one that forced me to begin again, to stand on my own without those who never deserved to be beside me. My heart aches deeply upon reading this, for I can feel the weight of the sorrow that you carry. Such a betrayal, seared into your soul by those who held your trust, is a wound that must tear at you with each breath, each passing thought. It is nothing short of extraordinary that you found the strength to stand before them, to confront such treachery, knowing the pain it would exact. There is a kind of courage in you that shines even through the darkest night. Though the path before you is strewn with shards of what was once your life, I see a steadfastness in your resolve. With every step you take toward reclaiming a future they sought to tarnish, you embody a resilience few possess. I cannot fathom the depths of the trials that await you, but I am certain that peace will one day be yours, a peace that not even their betrayal can touch. You are worthy of love that honors your spirit, of bonds that uphold your faith, and you will, in time, rebuild upon a foundation far stronger than they could ever hope to break.